Thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here. So hopefully everybody is seeing my screen, and I believe that the slides are coming out also, so you can follow along. We've got a lot to cover, so I'm just going to go ahead and dive on in. And let's see. So this is about becoming a tox detective for your patients using Toxicant testing in the real world. This is a repeat of what she just said. Today, we are going to be discussing the scope of the problem. So what's happening with toxins in our environment, sources of common environmental toxin and toxicants, symptoms associated with exposure. We'll go through a case study, and then we'll review those building blocks and the basics of building a protocol with this patient population. So a little bit to frame it, we are living in a toxic world. Everybody knows that. This particular graphic is from 2016. That was 8 years ago. The most current one I could find. You can only imagine what it looks like now. But as you see, there are very few states that had a low level of toxins that they put out. This is a great article and a nice visual for patients, especially new parents or prenatal patients, talking about maternal exposure to toxic metals, organic pollutants, smoking, air pollution, etc., and the negative impact it can have on the fetus throughout its life, not just while it's in utero. So let's look at a couple of ways that we can assess exposure, because that's that first step, right? What has the patient been exposed to? And one of the first tools that we have in our toolbox is this thing, a panel called ToxDetect. And it's looking at environmental toxicants. And so what are we testing? Everybody here knows the labeling of something as a toxin or a toxicant is highly, highly controversial. And controversial environment toxicants are things like organophosphates and food additives and bisphenols and so on and so forth. We also are very aware that items that have been banned in the US that have been banned in other countries are often allowed in the United States. And even if they haven't been banned in other countries, the parts per million or parts per billion that other countries allow are very frequently lower than what we allow in the United States. Throughout this presentation, you will see a whole lot of visuals. I am a visual learner, and I tailor my presentations to people who are also visual. I find that they really help teach patients as well. So this is a great diagram that shows how these environmental toxins and toxicants get into us as human beings. They are ubiquitous in our environment, and they're harmful, not just to humans, but frankly to all living beings in our environment. This is another diagram that shows something very, very similar. And here's all of your environmental toxicants. And then they come in through wastewater and they get into our ground, and then they're filtered in. And we're exposed to them in a myriad of ways, even when we think we're not. This is one of my favorite things to pull up for patients because people tend to think that environmental toxicants are out there. They're not inside their home because their homes are so nice and tightly sealed, and they do such a good job of blocking out their out. And this is a great reminder that indoor air quality is often some of the dirtiest air that we are breathing, and we spend a whole lot of time indoors. So let's talk about the patient population for the ToxDetect. Obviously, the simple ones are the ones that we all are aware of. So they have occupational exposures. They work at an airport. They work in a salon. They live near an industry. They live near an airport. They're in a rural community and they live near farms. Not all of them are organic. Or there's a known regional contamination. They live near a Superfund site, or they live close to a beach and there was a spill. Or you hear them talking and they talk about they drink tap water because it's fine. They don't try to do organic foods, all that kind of stuff. Diving a little bit deeper into the lesser known or the not immediately apparent, these are a selection, it is not exhaustive, of the symptoms and the diagnoses and the disorders that have been associated with exposure to environmental toxicants. What you will see is that the list is broad and it is varied and it is multi-system. And so we know that the overall health impacts of being exposed to environmental toxicants include things like oxidative stress, inflammation, cell death, mitochondrial dysfunction, and impaired immune function. And we see on this diagram, these toxicants are across all of our body systems. It's not isolated to a single one. So let's look at the ToxDetect really quickly. This particular test is a urine-based test, and the front pages will give you the high findings, and then it'll go into the moderate findings. The findings, the reference range used is based on NHANES. Past that, you go into the actual individual findings. I always encourage practitioners to go beyond just the roll-ups of the high and moderate findings, because as you see for this number 7, it wasn't past the 75th, so it didn't get into that moderate level. However, it is still there, and we don't necessarily know what level is safe. So I always want to know if it's there at all and to what level. Past that, we do our best to educate you and your patients. So really looking at where are the sources of this particular chemical compound? What are health implications? What are symptoms? What are diseases and diagnoses? If we know how it's detoxified, or if we know that there's a specific intervention that really helps with that individual chemical, then that's in these later interpretation pages for you. Just a quick note about NHANES, because I'm going to say that several times. It is US based. It is an incredibly large reference data set, and it is widely used. It is updated periodically. So while originally it focused in on the nutrient and toxic metals, it has been expanded to include a host of chemicals, and they continue to update the chemicals that they look at. It is pretty evenly split between males and females, and it has a very broad age range that goes from like 6 to 92. So the other tool in our toolbox is toxic and heavy metals. So toxic metals, we're all pretty familiar with these, right? So some elements, we need them. We need potassium, we need iron, we need sodium, we need magnesium. Some of these particular elements are very, very tightly controlled. So potassium, for example, it has an incredibly narrow window of homeostasis. If you're too low, if you're too high, you're admitted to the hospital and they're correcting that imbalance. Whereas others, like sodium, it's got a broader range of homeostasis. We need some, too much is bad, but there's a pretty broad wiggle room in there. Some elements are toxic at any level, things like lead and mercury and arsenic. And even the very, very low levels have been associated with negative outcomes. So this is a diagram helping people understand where are you exposed. You have industry exposure, so factories and vehicles and so on. And down at the bottom, you also have exposures that you don't really have control over. You've got erosion, you've got volcanoes, right? We don't have control over the environment, but they all come together and they get in our water and they get in our soil. They get into the crops, even if they're organic. We eat the crops, we eat the animals that ate the crops, we drink the water that came out of the ground. And now we've been exposed. So patient population, again, the easy ones, the known exposures, right? I played with a broken mercury thermometer when I was a kid. The occupational exposures, they are painters. A lot of paints have these heavy metals in them. And you've seen painters, it's all over the place. They're metal workers. They do stained glass, or they work in a factory, or they work at an airport or roadside. Dietary intake, fish, while super healthy, also is a really great place for exposure to heavy metals. Or they are on well water and they don't filter it, they've got copper pipes, or they're playing fast and loose with some of their mineral supplements, or they're using supplements that are not necessarily high quality and reputable or haven't been tested for contaminants. It's one of the huge reasons that we always funnel people to those reputable third-party quality tested supplement companies. And then on the other side, there are some symptoms, some common symptoms of toxic and heavy metal exposure, headache, brain fog, bowel changes, weakness, etc. The toxic metal urine this is an FMV. It can be done as an FMB or it can be done as a timed. And you'll see on the first page, you've got the metals that are toxic, and we know that they're toxic. And then on the next page, you've got your essential elements, and these are things that we need. However, we need them within a certain range, right? Too little is bad, too much is bad. This picture is deceptively beautiful, right? It's a pretty little picture of Aspergillus spouting off some mycotoxins. So mycotoxins, they are small, they are toxic little molecules. They can bioaccumulate. I know there's some controversy around that, but the literature shows that they can bioaccumulate. They are very difficult to eradicate, and their health impacts are numerous and they're system-wide. I always look at this picture and I go, I grew up in a house where we scraped the mold off the top of the bread and our mom gave it to us anyway. And I can't see your hands, so this isn't like a show of hands type thing, but do a little gut check. That little bin of strawberries down there, how many of you would eat the strawberry on the upper left-hand corner? And for those of you who said yes, I'm going to remind you that mold reproduce via hyphae, and those hyphae spread out and they go far and wide. And that means that that strawberry in that upper left-hand corner that you might eat probably still has mycotoxins in it. So mycotoxins, they are produced by some, but not all fungi. Not all fungi produce mycotoxins. They can be ingested because you ate that strawberry, or they can be inhaled because you were in a water-damaged building. They can come into contact with your eyes or with your skin. Remember, skin is our largest organ of absorption. Some are used as drugs. They're antibiotics. Phenolic acid, or MPA, is a life-saving drug for people who've had a transplant. It suppresses the immune system so that the body does not reject that organ. However, it is also a mycotoxin. And so some are incompatible with life. It varies widely, the level of exposure, the route of exposure, who the person is, and all the other insults that they've had to deal with. Many of these are used as chemical warfare agents. You have your Agent Orange, you've got your aflatoxins, and then we're all pretty well aware these are the things that we're talking about when we talk about sick building syndrome. They're in animal feed and they contaminate foods. Most countries have regulations around parts per million or parts per billion that are allowable in our food system. So again, lots of diagrams here to help you with education. So we can get exposed to mycotoxins because we directly ate them. We ate the greens that had mycotoxins. We ate the strawberry. Or because we ate the animal that ate the grains that had the mycotoxins. Similar, right? We can see this in fish. It's not just livestock that's eating grains, because now we get mycotoxins in the organisms that the fish are eating directly. This other last diagram I really, because down at the bottom, it gives a little bit of insight into ways that you might be able to get rid of mycotoxins in a food, heating it, certain wavelengths of light, etc. And then this is a nice, just huge diagram of start to finish. Here's all the ways that we could potentially be exposed to mycotoxins. We get a lot of pushback from people because they think that they are only exposed to mycotoxins when they see mold in a building, and that is unfortunately just not true. So the patient population for mycotoxins, and it's a past or present exposure, again, because they bioaccumulate just like all of the other things we've talked about so far. So are you in a building or a home? Do you see mold? Did you grow up in a moldy house? That kind of thing. Occupational. Do you work on a farm? Do you work in a granary? Are you spending a lot of time working even your own garden? And do you see those little hyphae across the top of your soil? And then diet. Is it primary or a secondary exposure? Are you eating the grains that are potentially contaminated, or the fruit that is potentially contaminated? And even if the person is a strict carnivore, you're still getting that secondary exposure because you're eating the animal that ate the mycotoxin. We see this associated with oxidative stress, especially changes in liver and kidney function. That's always something to make you think, gosh, I should look at mycotoxins for this person. And then one of the other things that always sticks out to me is psychosis, especially without a family history and especially acute onset. That is something that we've seen widely associated with acute and high levels of mycotoxin exposure. And so symptoms here, we've got symptoms of eye irritation, we've got GI changes, nausea, vomiting, rashes, hormone dysregulation, brain fog, fatigue, headache, breathing issues. What you should be thinking at this point in time is that these symptoms for mycotoxin are very, very similar to the symptoms for heavy metals, are very, very similar to the symptoms for environmental toxicants, right? It's without doing a test to see what it is next to impossible to narrow it down to say, okay, you have this, right? It's that whole test, don't guess. The World Health Organization calls mycotoxins the great masquerader because they're not isolated to a single system, right? We see toxicity across multiple systems, as you can see in this diagram. So on the Mosaics mycotox, the first page is very similar to the ToxDetect use elevations only. However, once you go through, here's that lovely diagram. It's the mycotoxins that this particular patient has are bolded, and so this will change based on your patient results. Really, really wonderful education piece for your patients. I always, again, encourage people to flip back to the backs and not just focus on what was elevated, because even some register, they're above the DL, but they're not quite into the red. That's still useful information. It's still something that the patient has, and you want to know that. Further back into the test, we blow out those interpretations and really educate on where is this coming from? What are known exposure routes? What are health implications? What are the mechanism of actions for toxicity and negative impacts? And then do we have any insight into how it's detoxified? Are there any specific interventions that work particularly well for this particular mycotoxin? And then my favorite part of this report is this chart in the back. I use this all the time to educate. It's the same information that's in the interps, but it's in a chart. And it focuses on the food sources, which are really helpful. And it just gives the patients a first and single place to look to help them understand it isn't just about the moldy building. It is also about the food that you're eating. And here are some things to avoid if you have an ochratoxin elevation, for example. So Mosaic, because these things go together so much, because the symptoms for all of these are so very similar, we have created these panels that group all of these together. I don't know about you, but what I experience is that most of my clients and patients, if I tell them they need 5 tests, they argue with me and they want to negotiate that down. But if I tell them they need 1 panel, they're like, oh, okay, I can do that. So all of these can be run off of a single urine sample, and it tends to be easier for your patient to swallow and for you to explain to them why they need this 1 panel without them trying to negotiate you down. Let's talk about this in application. This is a woman near and dear to my heart. I call her the renovator, right? She bought this old kind of icky rundown house, fell in love with it, and she began to restore it to make it into the home of her dreams. So she's a 43-year-old female, and she is refinishing this older home. She did the vast majority of the initial work, which is predominantly demo, herself. One of the first things that she did was pull out all of the old windows and doors and replace those with the new ones to seal it, right? To make sure that it was watertight and to make sure that nobody could break in. She didn't wear a mask during any of her demo. She wore gloves most of the time, but that was it. She didn't even make sure that her skin was covered. She was sleeping in one of the bedrooms upstairs, and that room was the only room that had a HEPA filter. No other room in the house had a HEPA filter. And the house had visible mold. You could even see in some of the pictures, there were visible mold on the walls. When she would rip up the carpet, there was visible mold all throughout the house. It was very typical older home. Because she's living in a house that is not necessarily fully functioning, she's eating a lot of takeout and eating out a lot. And so she tries to eat healthy, but she doesn't go out of her way to pick one restaurant or one faster food place over another one. It's what she's craving and what's convenient. She is having difficulty sleeping. So she's having some insomnia, and she's also incredibly tired, right? So she's not sleeping and she's tired. She had had asthma before, but it had gotten under control. And she was at the point where she just needed a rescue inhaler. She wasn't on maintenance meds because it was well controlled. But what she's noticed as she's been living in this house and doing this work is that she's starting to have a resurgence of her asthma type symptoms, and she's needing her rescue inhaler more frequently. She's having a ton of headaches, and she says her brain feels like it's slow to fire. Like she's having to hunt for words, she loses track of her thought, even sometimes mid sentence and mid conversation. She has noticed some GI changes. She's got some diarrhea and pretty frequent bloating. And then she talks about everything bugs her. She is bothered by smells that she never noticed before. She said that her eyes are really irritated once she's been at the grocery store for more than like 10 or 15 minutes. And she jokingly, when she was talking about what bugs her, she was like, people bug me. And she describes it as being pissy. She says that she was normally and in the past had been really friendly and super outgoing, but now is just pissy and annoyed with people and they just bug her. And she's chalking it up to stress because she's working on its home while trying to still have her life. And she's not sleeping, which, I mean, those are viable, but there may be something else going on. So let's look at her ToxDetect. For this particular patient, there were 4 things above the 95th, and we had 2 VOCs, we had a phthalate, and we had perchlorate. We also had a handful of moderate level results, so between the 75th and the 95th, and those were all VOCs. So looking in here, so phthalates are all things plastic, right? They come from, they're plasticizers. So she had, surprisingly, despite being in a ton of takeout, I expected this to be higher, but she had one that was moderate and one that was in that higher level. And the rest were below detectable limits for her, which is good. However, once we start to look at her VOs, this is where we start to see those moderate and higher elevations across the entire. VOCs are things that we find in a lot of building materials. We find it in automobile exhaust. We've got xylene from carpet backing and cigarette smoke, varnishes, all things that you're using when you're renovating a home. Styrene is also something that we find in to-go containers, those plastic little styrofoam type things. We see she has VOCs from solvents. So all of the things that she's using to get the old dried on gunky glue off of the floors, from the carpet, getting that old wallpaper down from the walls, etc. Her pesticides were all below detectable limits. I did not do anything to provoke. I just had her do an FMV for all of these test results. And for someone who's not choosing to eat organic, when all of their pesticides come back below detectable limits, I always wonder, is this that they are actually below detectable limits, or is it that their body has stored it? And because I didn't do anything to specifically provoke, I didn't do anything to specifically get her body to start to release those toxins, I just didn't catch them because her body has sucked those things into storage as a protective mechanism. And then on our other category, we see perchlorates. And one of our main sources of perchlorates is dairy. Perchlorates come from rocket fuel and fireworks and explosives. And so people see that and they're like, what the heck? I never use those things. I don't even use fireworks. I live in Arizona. We can't use fireworks. However, this is rampant from industry, and it gets in our soil and it gets into our water, and our dairy producing animals eat the grains that grow in the soil that were watered with the water that had perchlorate in it. And then we drink the milk, eat the cheese, etc. And so it's highly concentrated. And she didn't have any BPS, which is encouraging. BPS is the chemical that replaced BPA, and most studies are showing that it is at least as problematic, if not more so, than BPA was. So her toxic metals were a lot concerning. Again, not provoked. This is an FMV, so first warning void. And we're seeing things that aren't super surprising. She's drinking unfiltered water out of an old home. She is taking baths in unfiltered water out of an old home with old pipes. We're seeing nickel and lead and barium, which is a frequent groundwater contaminant, and antimony, all things that have the same symptom profile that she's experiencing, just like all of the other VOs that we've seen for her. And finally, her mycotox. She had elevations of ochratoxin, citrinin, and gliotoxins. That gliotoxin was really an impressive elevation. We always get asked, how elevated is this? And what I tell people, look at the normal range and think of it as order of magnitude above what's considered normal. So for this particular individual, every single one of these are a pretty significant elevation. And I'm not incredibly surprised. All three of these mycotoxins have been associated with water-damaged buildings, in addition to all of the grains and those types of things that she's also eating. This woman demoed an entire home that had visible mold without a mask. So just like on our tox, we want to flip the page and make sure that there are no other measurable mycotoxins. They just were measured at a lower rate. And for this particular individual, we didn't see any. Looking at her oat, and I just pulled out some highlights, I see things that I expect to see, right? So her kynurenic is right there at the line of normal. And to me, anything that we're hedging above that midline, it's something that makes me raise an eyebrow. Kynurenic acid is made when tryptophan goes down that alternate pathway. It's the kynurenic quinolinic pathway. So in the presence of stress, high cortisol, inflammation, oxidative stress, high estrogen, or inadequate B6, we can shunt tryptophan away from serotonin and melatonin over to this kynurenic quinolinic pathway. Kynuric acid has been associated with mood disorders. It's been associated with psychotic breaks when it's super duper high. It's neuroexcitatory. Both quinolinic and kynuric are considered neuroexcitatory and neurotoxins. So again, for someone who's having some mood issues, this is something I somewhat expect to find. Nutritional markers for her, again, not surprisingly, an across-the-board need for B vitamins, kind of an across-the-board need for her antioxidants, including up at the top, we see pyroglutamic acid, which is an indicator for a need for glutathione. Down here on the bottom, we see this 2-hydroxyhippuric, and this has been associated with GI imbalances, salicylate intake, but also aspartame. This particular woman chews a lot of gum, and she doesn't particularly, she chews your pretty standard brands of gum. I find that people forget that we absorb things in our mouth, even if we don't swallow them. And this prompts a conversation around choosing gum that does not have aspartame in it for this patient. So what do we do? Especially with environmental medicine, protocols can be very tricky. It is very easy to overwhelm them and overwhelm you. I tend to make my protocols into sections. Here are lifestyle interventions. Here are dietary interventions. Here are supplement medications. It helps break it up. So first and foremost for her, go somewhere else. Get out of the house. She should not be staying in the home while the home is being renovated. When she is in the home, wear protective gear, wear a mask, wear gloves, wear clothing that covers your body, and leave it at the home. Don't take it with you. Don't take it into your new space that you're staying at temporarily. Leave it there or immediately wash it. HEPA filters should be in the entire house, not just in one room. And ventilate the house. I get that she doesn't want people stealing her tools. I get that she was concerned about water getting in now that she's got all the mold out. But we still need to ventilate. As that one diagram showed, our indoor air quality is often worse than outside. So while people are there, open the windows, open the doors, let the bad stuff to get out, and have those HEPA filters running. Sauna for at least 20 minutes a day. And when she saunas, afterwards, immediately shower, right? In preferably filtered water. So wash off everything that her body has just detoxified via sweat. And then do not rewear the clothes she wore in the sauna, and do not reuse the towel that she used. It's fresh clothing, fresh towel every time. Filter the water, all of it. The water that you're drinking, the water that you're bathing in, filter, 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 especially until you get those pipes updated. And then sleep hygiene, right? People always are like, oh, here's some supplements to help you sleep. And they forget about the sleep hygiene part. It's the minimizing lights before bed. Bedroom should be dark, no electronics, white noise, sleep masks. There's body scan meditations that you can do, but it's similar to dietary interventions, right? You want your diet to be beautiful first, and then you come in with supplements. For sleep, we want good sleep hygiene, and then we come in with supplements. From a dietary perspective, the marshmallow cold root infusion tea mixed with a chamomile tea was the first thing that I brought up to her. We had a conversation about containers and the fact that we really want to predominantly eat and drink out of glass, ceramic, or stainless steel. And marshmallow cold root infusion is a beautiful thing that my patients love. It's super simple. It's a wonderful mucosal rebuilder, GI calmer, and they feel empowered when they do it because they get their hands in there and they get to play with herbs. Whole foods-based diet, organic when possible. We talked about Dirty Dozen and Clean 15. Complete elimination of dairy. Remember, her perchlorate was very, very high. No artificial sugars, looking at you, aspartame. And then be mindful when eating out. She lives in a town that has healthy choices. So she can pick a restaurant that is farm to table organic, or she can pick a chain that gives you a bucket of food for $5 and you know the quality isn't there. Pick accordingly. And then going to the mycotoxins test, really having her limit as much as possible the foods that were predominantly associated with the mycotoxins that she had elevated. And then water, lots and lots of water, filtered at least 64 ounces a day, preferably more, especially because I want her detoxifying and she is doing sauna, which means she's going to sweat, which drives the amount of water up for her. So supplements. I personally prefer blended binder products. I find that I have better success when I use that versus the individual binders. Here are the ingredients of the particular binder that I like to use that I've had good success with. Multivitamin mineral packs. Similar to the 5 tests versus a panel, what I find is that if I prescribe people a single supplement pack, they mentally consider it one thing, even though within that pack there's 7 pills. It's a mental gymnastics that are gone through, and I just go with it. So for me, these detox support packs, I love them. I have a lot of really good success. And in the packs, they've got a B complex, they've got a multivitamin and a multimineral. There's fish oil, there's probiotics, there's liposomal glutathione, and there's alpha lipoic acid. And so it's easy to they just carry that pack with them and they take it through the day. A GI repair powder, I prefer powders over pills because I want direct contact with the mucosal surfaces of the substances that are supposed to be helping heal that mucosal surface. The one that I use has zinc, glutamine, colostrum, cyprium, and quercetin in it. Quercetin is a phenomenal mast cell stabilizer. Chewable DGL as needed. Part of her bloating and part of her feeling short of breath, I suspect, is a little bit of acid reflux and a little bit of just irritation. When she started chewing DGL, she noticed that she had less bloating, and she noticed that she didn't have that feeling of struggling to take a deep breath as much. Complete digestive enzymes with every meal. These are digestive enzymes. They're not hydrochloric acid. That's different. So this is a product that contains amylase, lipase, protease, as well as several other ases that help you break down your macronutrients. And then I did come in with melatonin at bedtime, one to help her fall asleep, but also melatonin is an amazing antioxidant and she's struggling right now. So any way that I can make a single thing do double or triple duty, I'm gonna come in with that one. For this patient, I really wanted to run additional testing. She wasn't open to it, so it's still in the background, and I'm hoping to be able to do it at some point down the road. I want a comprehensive stool test. I want to see the health of the lining. I want to see what the gut microbiome looks like. I want to know what her inflammatory markers are, and I want to know where her short-chain fatty acids are. I really want to look at her salivary hormones. The cortisol times 4, I expect to be abnormal, but she's a 43-year-old female, and some of the symptoms that she's experiencing are potentially consistent with perimenopause. So I want to look at those hormones because I don't want to focus so much on environmental toxins and environmental toxicants that I miss that she's also needing some hormone support. And then I really want to look at DNA methylation. I want to look at those SNPs. I want COMT and MAO and MTHFR and all those beautiful things. I want to know if she's struggling to break her catecholamines down. I want to know if she has challenges in these detoxification pathways that I'm trying to help her push to get rid of these exposures that she's had. So let's take a second and look at the fundamentals of building protocols when we're working with people who have had exposures to toxins. So across the board with everybody, right, we are balancing this intrinsic. So what is your DNA? What are your SNPs? What are your pre-existing conditions? What is your age? And this is not the number based on the year you were born. This is your physiologic age. I've met 30-year-olds who are 60 from a physiologic perspective and 60-year-olds who are 30 from a physiologic perspective. The number is a number. It's the physiology of aging. Coupled with what are you bathing in? What are those extrinsic factors? What is your housing situation? What is your stress level? What are you nourishing your body with, or what are you not nourishing your body with? And where those things come together, that's where you're meeting your patient. Those are those epigenetics. So fundamentals, minimize the exposure. You will notice that I do not use the word avoid. It's easy for people to become overwhelmed in this arena. And human beings have a tendency to go to all or nothing. And so if I talk about avoiding, they get overwhelmed and they say, I can't avoid all of those things. And therefore they don't avoid anything. And that's not what I want, right? That shoots myself in the foot. It's not helping them. It's not helping me. So I use the term minimize. Minimize the exposure. Do the simple things. Filter your water. Filter your air. Address the intakes that are coming via food and your personal care products. Those things are things that you can control relatively easily. Next, we need to make sure that they're able to eliminate the toxins, right? Old school naturopaths, we talk about opening the emunctories. The emunctories are our organs of elimination. They're the ways that our body takes out the trash. And so are they pooping, peeing, sweating, breathing? If you've ever been around somebody who's been exposed to certain VOCs, when they breathe, you smell it. People sometimes forget that breathing is one of the ways that we actually detoxify. So they have to be able to take the trash out before you ever push detoxification pathways. And then, of course, we also want to make sure that their liver is functioning well and we're supporting it, their kidneys are working well, etc. Good GI health. Do they have a healthy gut microbiome? Is it well balanced? Do they have a nice, strong, tight junction GI lining? And do they have enzymes to break down the food that they're eating that you're asking them to spend additional money and care on? Ensure that their macro and micro needs are met. We do an incredibly good job of making sure that their micro needs are met with our B complexes and our multi-minerals and vitamins. We sometimes forget that the macro needs also need to be met. They need adequate amounts of protein, fat, and carbohydrates to fuel their level of physical activity. Help them ensure that they're getting it. They need to be hydrated, especially if you're going to detoxify them. They need to sleep. Our immune system sweeps the body. It's the janitorial crew that comes through when we are in deep sleep. If we do not have deep sleep, our immune system doesn't sweep the body the way that it's supposed to. And they need to move with intention. It could be that they go to the gym. It could be that they take their dog for a walk. It could be that they do yoga. It could be like my home renovator. Her daily movement was getting into the house and using her hands with the physicality of working on her home. I don't care what it is, as long as it's intentional daily movement. Meet the patient where they're at. You've got to respect their level of health. If you are dealing with someone who's incredibly frail, don't push them, right? They're going to get super sick. You're going to make them worse. Meet them where they're at. If they're hale and hearty, then you could perhaps go super heavy duty for them. If they can take time off work to focus purely on detoxification, hit them hard. They can handle it. If they're not, and they're trying to deal with their kids and their house and their job and all of these things while also going through a detoxification protocol, you might want to slow that protocol down so that they can still deal with activities of daily living. Recognize that it may change. Where they're at today may not be where they're at tomorrow, and you need to be able to be flexible and adjust accordingly. The fundamental supplements, right? Fiber binder, antioxidants, multivitamin minerals, omega-3s, and our immune modulators, because our immune systems go wacky when we are exposed to these chemicals. Medications, right? There's bile acid sequestrants. There are antimicrobials, whether it's supplement or whether it's a prescription. Sometimes those things are all indicated. This is not a conversation about chelation, so I'm not going to go there, other than to say it is something to consider with heavy metals. However, it should not be done unless you have been trained specifically to do it and do it safely. And they are robust enough to handle that. So additional testing for all of the reasons we already talked about. Cystool testing. We detoxify so many things through our gut. We want to make sure that they're actually able to get it out and that their junctions are nice and tight and their gut microbiome is robust. Organic acids, the oat test, it gives us insight into mitochondrial function, nutritional needs, etc. The omega-3s give us insight into whether they're in a pro or an anti-inflammatory state. It also helps us determine some robustness of their immune system and helps us tailor how much they need to take. Amino acid testing, especially with people who have any sort of mood issues, we really want to know that. Sometimes it is an imbalance of just a couple of amino acids that can be tweaked in addition to detoxifying that can make a really big difference to the mood and the outlook that our patient has. Urine porphyrins, it's a great way to see the actual impact of some of these heavy metals, especially. And then IgG and frankly IgEs, that's another source of inflammation. And we don't want to miss that. We want to minimize the insults to the system as much as possible. And then again, SNPs, really looking at what are the detoxification pathways that I need to support to make this patient and their journey through this detoxification land as pleasant and as successful as possible. It's a marathon, it's not a sprint. Empower your patient, give them education. Environmental working group's amazing. We're all very familiar. Dirty Dozen, Clean 15, Skin Deep, their sunscreen guide. This little yellow picture here is a Think Dirty app. It's an app that you load on your phone. When you're at the store, you scan the barcode of a personal care product. It gives you a score of 0, meaning not toxic, up to 10, meaning as toxic as you could possibly be. And it also breaks down all of the individual ingredients, telling you what they're suspected of. Are they an endocrine disruptor, carcinogen? And it rates the strength of the evidence supporting that particular toxicity of that particular item. Super handy dandy. And your patients use it because now they don't have to memorize all the things they're looking for on the labels. And for those of us who are at a certain age, we can't read the labels anyway because they're too small. The next link here is the Superfund site. Your patient should know if they live by one. It's going to impact how they live their lives. And hopefully they see this before they buy a home and can choose one that's further away from a Superfund site. Do not overwhelm them or yourself, please. This gets very tricky very quickly. Again, coming back to that avoidance, right? We have to go out in society. We breathe the air. We walk in parks that are sprayed with organophosphates. Like, we need to live our lives. And it's very, very, very easy to go down these scary rabbit holes with this particular branch of medicine. So help them understand that even baby steps, even tiny little changes can have incredibly important and impactful benefits to their lives. And then, because I love education, here are some additional resources for you and your patient. You guys should all have this to get some more education on the topics of environmental medicine.
Welcome to Rupa Health, the best place to order, manage, and track results from over 30 different lab companies in one single place for free. It's going to take you under 2 minutes to sign up, and you can order any functional medicine lab for your client in under 30 seconds. Let me show you how it's done. So here's our beautiful interface. I'm typing in the name of my client, selecting the lab that I want to order for them, and hitting send. From there, Rupa and their amazing team handle the rest. They email the client, collect payment, and even offer an interest-free 3-month payment plan. We've also built the world's largest library of information about chronic health conditions, the lab tests that can help you find the root cause, and the evidence-based interventions that you can use to help people heal from them. It's called the Rupa Health Magazine. There, we have in-depth articles about almost any health condition you can imagine. And we give you step-by-step protocols that other clinicians have used to help their clients heal and that are verified by evidence-based sources. You should totally check it out, and it'll transform your practice. And we can't wait to see you. So make sure you sign up today at rupahealth.com.